This is IVP.
This is The Disruptors, a podcast from InterVarsity Press.
Tracks never been a fabricator, but like MOK, I've been an agitator.
Hosted by me, Esau McCaulley. There's different kinds of people who make sweet tea.
Mm-hmm. If your spoon does not stand up in the tea because there's so much sugar. But then I like an Arnold Palmer. So I like a really tart lemonade and a really sweet tea.
That's what my mom, I used to literally like get a face cramp when I first, sweet tea when it hits you.
Yes.
And you just kind of like, Lord.
That's the Lord's work. That's the Lord's work.
I feel like for this episode more than any other, we need to like lay out who the characters in this drama are. It's so hard when you're talking to someone who's like family and you just forget to say, oh, you might not know who it is. So Jasmine Holmes is obviously an African-American woman who wrote a book called Mother to Son. She is the daughter of a famous Black pastor, and her husband is an administrator at an evangelical seminary. She kind of was dealing with the dynamics of having certain expectations placed upon her because of her father, and certain assumptions about her ideas and her husband's ideas because they come out of evangelical settings. And so if you're trying to figure out what's going on during some of the conversations in the podcast, it's really coming to grips with how does Jasmine as a Black woman find her own voice and not just be defined by the men in her life. Me and Jasmine both released books a few months apart during a summer where America was going through great change. So we both published books dealing with race and injustice during a season when America was having a reckoning. And both of us operated in spaces where people weren't always excited about having that conversation. And so dealing with some of the pushback and still maintaining your joy was something that I really wanted to explore. And also, I wanted to talk about how those things sometimes change us. What is it like to release something that you care about, that you put a lot of passion and thought into, receive criticism and affirmation, and how do you balance those things? Welcome back to season 2 of the Disruptors podcast. The reason I want to have you back, I shouldn't say this. I have so many friends who were on season 1 when we were popping the trunk. But I said, now that we're back, I wanted to bring you back because this is like a radically different place from season 1 to season 2. And all of us have been through a lot. For the people who don't know, what book did you release in March?
I wrote a book called Mother to Son, Letters to a Black Boy on Identity and Hope. And it was letters to my son about really race, justice, and relationships.
The first time I talked to you was on the last episode, and it was a very happy it was the happiest of all of the episodes. It was like the relationship podcast. I got to talk about, it was good. But now I feel like we got slapped. I feel like we got slapped around. We were young and naive. We were just like living life and just telling jokes and talking about being moms and dads and relationships. But I feel like we've gone through a pandemic and a real season of unrest, and now we just come through. We're not even coming through. We're recording this on Thursday, and the election, it looks like it's heading towards the Biden election, but there's all kinds of discussions about lawsuits, and so everything still seems unclear. But maybe I should just ask you, how has like the post-author publishing world coming into a pandemic and racial unrest, how has it changed you?
Oh, goodness. It has, I think for me, because of the type of book that I wrote, a lot of people who thought that they knew who I was and how I think and what my mindset is have learned that they were wrong. Yeah, it was so weird because when I was writing the book a couple years ago, I was like, people have kind of stepped away from talking about this topic, but it's still super relevant to me in my life. So I'm going to just be faithful and I'm going to write this. And I don't know if it's going to be the national conversation when my book comes out, but it's a conversation that's going to be happening in my house. And then 2020 hit and everybody was talking about all the stuff that's in the book. And I think people were, I don't know that people knew what to expect. Like I was on a couple of podcasts and people were like, so why are you writing a parenting book when your oldest is 4? And I'm like, no, it's not a parenting book. It's a book about my hopes. It's a book about my prayers. And when I feel like on both sides of the aisle, I had people who were thinking that I would fit easily into a mold, and read the book and realized that I'm an individual, just like all of us.
When you say a mold, what do you think they were expecting to get from the book? And you talked about both sides. So tell me like 2 misperceptions of what people expected to get from you versus what you think you gave them.
For sure. I had one person come to me and was like, yeah, I did not know how conservative you were before I read your book. It kind of shocked me because I was expecting you to be like a raging liberal, whatever that means. And so,
liberal just means black person who disagrees with them.
Exactly. I'm like raging liberal. And also like Esau, and you can relate to this, I'm sure. It's like, well, where'd you get that idea?
Yeah.
Like, why did you think that about me in the first place? What have I said that made you? But I digress.
Yes. No. Don't digress because so we both found ourselves in similar situations because I wrote Reading While Black 2 or 3 years ago. And it's a similar situation. Like I wrote it in I started writing the book coming into what became the Trump presidency.
Yeah.
But I didn't know at the time that like America was going to become what it became. And so my book was released a few months later, but into the same period. Mm-hmm. And there was a sense in which like for every person who said thank you, there was somebody else who said, have you abandoned the faith?
Yep.
And so how was that emotional? That's what I was trying to get at. So you said that, one group says you're too conservative. The other group thinks that you were too liberal.
Yeah. Even the fact that I'm just talking about race makes me liberal. Doesn't matter that I'm raising a black son in America in 2020. Talking about race makes me liberal.
So how, and it's funny because I can hear it in your voice. I remember the joy in Jasmine's voice and the joy in mine. So I'm not even trying to play it off. I just feel like we have been smacked around.
Oh, it's been rough. But I remember after the last podcast, you called me and you were like, hey, we talked about your dad a little bit. I want to cut that out because I don't want this podcast to be about him. I want it to be about you. And I feel like Black women are often seen in relation to whatever Black man, which I really appreciated. And I'd already had such a good time on the podcast. And then you were on speaker when I talked to you, and Philip looked at me and he was like, okay, I get why you like this dude. Like he gets it.
I wanted to respect Jasmine. I want to give you your moment. And to be honest, I'm not super plugged in to kind of like I wasn't at the time, like the intramural evangelical fights. So people really thought it was weird that I didn't really know who your dad was, but I really didn't. I didn't.
That's why we had such a good time, honestly.
Yeah, so like when I say I didn't know, I'm an Anglican. So like, you know how far Anglican is from like Southern, is your dad Southern Baptist? That shows you I haven't even deep dived it yet. So
1689.
Yeah. So I was miles away. Now, trust me, in the years since we talked, I've gotten a lot of email. Actually, and here's the funny thing. Hope that's not bad. I still haven't listened to like the sermons of things. People started sending them to me.
That's what they do.
Like in the last, after Reading While Black, a segment of evangelicalism said there's one Black man I needed to listen to and learn from, and that was your father. And that's when I was introduced to him. But coming into last season, I didn't know.
So that's like before all of this stuff started happening and jumping off. I've had so many people send me his daughter his videos and be like, have you seen this? Like I had one person who sent it to me and I was like, that's my dad. And she was like, yeah, but have you watched it? And I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah, I remember. I remember. I told you, like me and Philip, we need to link up one day. Because I remember one time Philip slid on the internet and told everybody to fall back because that was my wife. I was like, that's what I'm talking about. That's my energy, Philip. That's my energy.
And that is him 100%. We have been in this weird fishbowl. And it was like this back in 2014 when we first got married.
Okay.
After Michael Brown. And it's kind of been a resurgence of people just like, I mean, there was a time I got off Twitter for a few weeks because every day somebody was getting on Twitter and telling me what a disappointment I was to my dad. And somebody compared me to Judas.
Oh,
like,
oh,
yeah. Because I was like, it's weird how people tell me that I'm a disappointment to my dad, but like I know my dad and I'm not a disappointment to
yeah.
him. So and I was like, I'm his disciple. Like he raised me to think for myself. So and then somebody was like, well, yeah, but like Judas was one of Jesus' disciples. And I was like, wow.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
Wow. Spicy.
Let me tell you what I wanted to avoid as a Black Christian who was coming into the public. It may seem like it was way more planned, but I just, cause I kind of consume culture. I like watched like what happened to people like Lecrae or Jamar Tisby, just African Americans who talked about justice, who were then extremely vilified by segments of evangelicalism. And Jamar was on the podcast last year, and he talked about how long it took him to recover from that emotionally, and the spiritual damage that it does. Even if you know that you're right, it hurts.
Yeah.
And so what I said to myself. And I'm not accusing Jamar of being bitter, so that's not what I'm trying to say. What I was trying to say, I didn't want people's criticisms to change me.
Yeah, of course.
And so I said from the beginning, I didn't want to establish myself in a way that like depended upon somebody's approval.
Or depending on somebody's disapproval.
Or disapproval. So disapproval. And so I was not even a part of Southern kind of Baptist. We need to keep it 100. It's like the Southern Baptist people and a lot of like super reform people. Those are the people who we're talking about. Yeah. So I used to think to myself, and this is one of the things that like that I've learned. I used to think that the question was like whether or not the argument was biblical or reasonable. But when I saw reasonable people like being attacked, I'm like, and this is no shade. I'm like, Jasmine just wrote a book about how to raise Black kids. Like, what y'all mad about?
Right.
And if that's the level of anger, it's merely our existence that is the problem, not the arguments that we make.
It's people gravitating towards a message for better or for worse that makes them more comfortable. Something that is more palatable to them. And honestly, like the video that everybody's passing around from my dad, I was like, so what did you think about the part where he talked about police brutality? And people are like, what? I'm like, this is some selective hearing.
Here's the question. And this is like the question that kind of gave me a lot of freedom is there an example of any Black person? And maybe this is for the listeners, for the person who listens to the Disruptors podcast. Here's some Google research for you. Is there an example of a Black person who you disagree with who is not also a heretic, or is that a completely overlapping category?
Oh. And
so what I'm saying is, when you get to the point where like the only Black people who get it are the Black people who agree, then we're in a because we on a spectrum. And this is the other problem. They're not actually talking to the people who hold the views that they're critical of. They're just reaching to the proximate Black person. And each time like another segment of Black people leave, they just find the next proximate Black person. So Philip wrote an article called "We Need to Be Uncomfortable," and it led to this backlash. And you've released your book, and it's led to people sending you, videos of your own dad. How have you maintained your joy in the middle of it?
Part of it is just understanding that people have such a limited understanding of who we are. I talked about therapy in the last podcast. I'm talking about it in this podcast because it's very important. But Philip and I have both noticed that so many of these issues just come from people projecting their own personal baggage on us and wanting us to be not individuals, but tools for their affirmation of whatever they think and whatever they feel. So they read Philip's article and they feel like an ownership of him. Like, you should say this, you should say that, because that's the kind of mouthpiece that I am comfortable with. Or they read my book and they know that I was homeschooled and they know that, I did the whole courtship thing, and they're like, okay, this is what we want our mascot to be. And you're not being a good mascot. And you say that you don't want to be a mascot, and that's not an option. So I think understanding that that's not on me. Like, if somebody wants me to be a mascot for everything that it means to grow up and be a perfect homeschool graduate who has perfect marriage and perfect kids and that's on them.
I think at a certain point, people would like wonder why they can't find the right kind of Black person.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh no, totally.
because it feels like we get cycled through in certain spaces.
We do.
And that's what I mean when I talk about a lot of the conversation is with the Black person who is proximate to them. So they see somebody Black do something on TV, or they read about a Black person on Fox News, and then they say, well, where's the closest Black person that I can find? And so they actually find the Black people who are trying to help.
Yep.
And then they say, and it is true, they say, like, you're supposed to be one of our Black people. And one of the interesting things about it is, and it's, I was just reading someone else on the internet who said, you know what, I'm still a Christian, but I don't hang out in these spaces anymore. Stay out of my comments. Yep. Because it's not only do you feel like you're owned by a certain community, they don't let you leave.
No.
And I'm not talking. And I'm not talking about leaving the faith. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about leaving Christianity. I'm talking about once they have anointed you as someone who the kind of Black person that they like, and you disappoint them, they never stop trying to turn you back into that Black person again. They're consistently disappointed that you are not who they want you to be. And the fact that they cycle through, the fact that there's graveyards filled, or spiritual graveyards filled with Black people whose faith has been wrecked on the shores of expectations, ought to raise the question of why can't we just find, maybe because we don't exist. Right. And if we don't exist, maybe it's because you're trying to fit us into a place that we weren't meant to fit. And and this is one of the things, forgive me for rambling, but this is one of the things that, like, I will actually defend Black people who disagree with me. So, like, I don't actually think that, like, we all need to be like me, or even the fact that, like, your father can't hold the opinions that he holds. And he can come across those things honestly. And if I was sitting in a room, if I was sitting somewhere with your dad and me and you and him, we could have a conversation. That's a great conversation. You and him. It's not a great conversation when he is like, becomes the mold that we all have to fit into. And I think that's where the difficulty comes from, even from his daughter. Not that you're mad at your father. And one of the great things it's funny when you go back and re-listen to the podcast, I hear it with like more context. It's not that you're mad at your father. You're mad at
He's the person that I call whenever stuff gets crazy. I'm like, Dad, get your people. I don't know. He's like, I'm sorry, baby. Does he have control? I mean, can he do that? Does it even work? No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. He put up a whole like Instagram post about my book and how proud he was of it and like how he like loved it and it was awesome. And his followers were just like, oh, he's such a good dad. Like, even when she's going in the wrong direction, he's still... And it's just like, I don't know what to tell you.
I can't help you. So
I can't help you.
So, okay then, though, I get that. There have been the haters. They've gotten 15 minutes of energy. Let's just put them to the side and say, how have Black mothers responded to what you've written? And not even Black mothers, have mothers in general responded to your message?
It's been so cool to have, again, I'm new to Mississippi. I've only been here for 4 years and I have a lifetime to go before I understand these weird people. But it's been a really neat experience to have people in my community read the book and to see like it's showing up in these local bookstores and it's, you know, people whose kids I teach are reading it. And it's people that go to my church are reading it. And it's been a cool experience talking to moms because I think motherhood is just this universal thing. And it's a really, really easy entrance point to why these conversations matter and why we need to be having these conversations. And so I've had just innumerable conversations with moms who, and honestly, I cannot complain. My book has right now, let's see, give it 6 months. But right now, my book only has one bad review on Amazon. I can't complain. Like it's
and
not
tell
like
him I said pull up whoever the reviewer is.
It's not like people are like beating up on it. It's been a fine experience. Most of the criticism that I've received has been from people who haven't even taken the time to read it yet. But from people who have taken the time to read it, I've just gotten so much feedback about really what I hear over and over again is the conversations that it starts.
Yeah.
That feeling of like, I never thought about it this way. And you've helped me to think about an issue that honestly I never had to think about.
So
that's been the main reaction.
Trust me, I know what it's like. I got a book called Reading While Black, and folks get in their feelings about that title. Boy.
It's a great title.
I'm saying like the people who haven't read the book.
Yeah.
So how do you balance then writing a book about motherhood, and being a mom is a huge part of who you are, but you also are a writer and you are a teacher. And do you ever feel like that making your first book about motherhood pigeonholed you? So even though the content of the book isn't like that, but the idea that you wrote like about being a parent makes people kind of put you in the mom lane, not in the writer, public intellectual, teacher lane.
Yeah, totally. I feel like that would have been a possibility. I'm actually working on 3 more books.
I know now. That's why we transitioning. That's called setting you up. There we go.
I know. I took it. I saw it.
Okay, take your lane.
And I think one of the reasons why I jumped so quickly into new projects is because I was like, okay, like, I'm not just going to keep writing about motherhood, and I'm not just going to write about like, I'm also not just going to write about being a Black woman. I'm not just going to write about being a teacher. I'm not just going to write about, I think one of the great experiences is we got a letter from IVP, kind of like giving us an update on sales. And I talked to my agent and I was like, hey, I got this letter, like, looks like sales are going well. What should I do now? And he was like, it's a really good time to think about another book. And I'm going, wow, my book just came out in March. Like, it's August. I need to be thinking about another book. And he was like, I mean, strike while the iron's hot. So I was talking to Philip and I was thinking, what's next? Like, I don't want to write a book about motherhood next. I know that.
Yeah. And
I don't want to write a book that's broadly about racial reconciliation again, because the thing about being a writer, which I'm sure you have experienced too, is people are just like, oh yes, what brand are you?
Yes. Can I tell you, people, like, when they review my book, someone said to me, I was surprised how much Bible is in it. It's called biblical interpretation. Like, the book's about the Bible. Wow. And so, like, people think that it's like a racial reconciliation book. And it's,
you're Black,
I'm Black and I wrote it. And so people just want you to say, okay, keep teaching me about racial reconciliation, which is fine. But there's a reason. People are going to be mad, like, when the next book I drop is like a Galatians commentary or something. So, I mean, I get it.
I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
It's coming.
I am all the way here for it. So I just, the next project, like the one that's coming up right now, is a book about Black women in Christian history whose names you do not know, but you should.
Oh, look at this.
Hey everybody, producer Richard Clark here. InterVarsity Press wanted me to let you know about another podcast they've just launched. And honestly, if you're into disruptors, I think you're going to like this one. It's called the Every Voice Now podcast. Every week, Mila Kim and Ed Gilbreth showcase the stories of how authors of color manage to write and publish their books. As Gilbreth explains, those authors are doing something more vulnerable than just putting words to a page. They're sharing their entire life with an audience.
For anyone who's actually going to be able to write a book and see it through to completion, it has to be more than just, I want to write a book. It has to really be their life, and it grows out of that journey and what God has been doing for years and years. I heard another IVP author, Brenda Salter McNeil, say one time that one of her latest books that she worked on, she started writing it, but then over time she realized it was writing her. You have to be just immersed and absorbed by the message and the story in order to actually finish a book, I would think. And we're seeing this in the stories of the different authors that are on the Every Voice Now podcast. It's bigger than just words to paper. It's life.
I think by the time people listen to this podcast, we will have our first Black and South Asian American vice president, probably in large part due to Stacey Abrams. And so this is kind of turning into, in some sense, the year of the Black woman. How have you looked upon that? And did that have anything to do with you deciding to write a book about Black women of faith? So how, are those things related? Are they separate? What do you think?
Just like with Mother to Son, I just wrote what was inspiring me at the time, and then it suddenly became relevant to more people. When I say relevant, I mean, it's always been relevant to me. I'm a Black woman, like every day of the week, whether it's in the news cycle or not. But I mean, it's become more relevant to a wider cross section of people. But honestly, what made me write the book is that when I wrote Mother to Son, I have a chapter in there about representation matters. And I mentioned some names of some Black missionaries. And honestly, my friend Karen Ellis gave me those names. And, you know, I just talked to her. I was like, hey, tell me some Black Christians who, because I mean, growing up in predominantly white evangelical circles, it's like, all right, so there's like no faithful Black people in history. I guess it's just a bunch of white people. And so Karen gave me a couple names, and it just, I mean, it took off. First, I was going to write about Ida B. Wells and Fannie Lou Hamer. And yeah, I was like, okay. But then I started digging even deeper, and I found these names that I did not know. I found like Sarah G. Stanley, she's white presenting missionary who went south after the Civil War to teach freed people how to read. And like, she gave racists such bad tongue lashings. It is beautiful. It is beautiful.
I keep talking about the one thing that, so this is, you want to talk about how research changes you. One of the things, the biggest change that I underwent while researching and reading while Black was understanding Black rhetoric. Mm-hmm. And I had unconsciously kind of taken this posture that if you speak in measured tones, then people will just listen to you more. And I started getting pushback when I thought I was using relatively measured tones.
Yep.
And then I went back and I read Frederick Douglass, and he melting faces in like the 1800s.
Absolutely.
And I was like, and then you start, and you look at the abolitionist literature and the slave testimonies. This was they were telling the truth when it cost something.
Yes.
And I said, I realized that the problem isn't the rhetoric. The problem is the thing itself. And the fact that you have a woman who was willing to speak in that way during that time speaks to, like, first of all, the courage that her faith inspires, but also this burning need that I see amongst Black men and women in every generation to make their voice heard. So how do you deal with this fact now that, like, and maybe it's a good thing, like people are saying we need to read Black women, and you're a Black woman writer. Do you feel that as pressure? Do you feel that as paternalism? How are you feeling this as like finally people are paying attention to it? Do you feel like it's lip service? Like, how are you responding to the let's pay attention to Black women, like, conversation that's going on in the culture?
I'm here for it. Honestly, it's so funny. I teach at a majority white school, and the other week we had an instance where a teacher was running up on she's teaching the seniors, and they're talking about constitutional law, and they're talking about how the founding fathers viewed slavery. And she was like, Jasmine, I know that you research this issue a lot. Could you come talk to the seniors? And it was one of those things where, like, it was just awkward. It wasn't handled super well. And so I went and I talked to them, and I'm getting another chance to do it with like actual preparation and a PowerPoint and handouts. And somebody at the school was like, Jasmine, I just hate that, like, you're the Black woman and they're asking you to teach about this. Like, why can't they teach about it themselves? And I'm like, honestly, that's why I'm here. Like, if you don't feel comfortable teaching about constitutional law and slavery, I have spent my adult life learning about that because I want to know, like, I want to understand. And if you're going to allow me to come in, and if you're going to allow me to teach what I want to teach, which they do, then by all means, I'll come in. And I think the difference, I was trying to explain to somebody that the only way that I see it as paternalistic or tokenism is if it's somebody asking me to do something that's not in my wheelhouse. So me talking about women, me talking about history, me talking about like Black womanhood, that's all Jasmine stuff. So I'm happy to do it. Now, if somebody came to me and they were like, Jasmine, you know, somebody needs to really address like unequal housing in America, and like you're Black, I would feel a little bit some kind of way.
So how do you, and I can speak about this as an African American, like, male who writes, and there's been a general push to just like read Black people more generally. But let me ask you this question. How, and I'm hoping to learn something in this moment. How do you speak about like critically engaging Black male and female voices? So when I say this, I mean like after we've read, people say read Black people, and then I would see people list like
Yeah.
10 books, and we all believe 10 different things, right? So, so
Yep.
like it
Yep.
ain't as simple as just like read Black people. As a Black woman who wants to have her own space in the academy, have you found it helpful to critically engage with Black people who you disagree with? Because I've made it a habit to almost never come for other Black people in public, just because it's not enough of us for me to be like fighting with you on the internet. So well then what do you do then? Do you just kind of say I disagree quietly? Like how have you found it helpful to critically engage, at least in your own private world, Black people who you disagree with?
So one of the chapters in my book is called The Woman That Almost Got Left Out. Her name is Nanny Helen Burroughs. And she was, basically they called her the female Booker T. Washington, and have me back on and we'll talk about Booker T. Washington. But, not my favorite. So I was reading some of her stuff, and at first I was really excited because I found another Black woman's voice that I'd never heard before. And I was reading it, and some of it was really Booker T. Washington-esque. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to put her in the book because, ew, like we don't need any more of this. And then I stopped myself and I said, you know what? This woman spent her entire life pouring into the Black community. I can't count the amount of associations she was a part of. She started a school. She was part of the NAACP. She was part of the National Baptist Convention. Like she has essays on essays on essays about this. And so let me read and see if I can find something that I actually agree with. And lo and behold, the more I read of her, the more compassionate I became, the more I understood where she was coming from. And the more I started to see that as much as she critiqued Black people and Black culture, sis was not here for white racism either. Like she literally talks about white people having to overcome their whiteness in the early 20th century. So I think finding things that I can appreciate about people that I disagree with has gone such a long way for me, where I went from, oh yeah, she's not going to be in my book because I don't want to represent that kind of thought, to, man, isn't it so great that I can put a diversity of thought in my book and show that not everybody is on the same wavelength all the time, but that's what it means to be an intellectual, and that's what it means to take part in conversation. She was known for rigorous debate. Like, am I capable of that kind of debate? And coming more from that place than I was so binary, like especially in these evangelical circles. It's just like, well, are they solid? And it's like, what does that mean?
Well, it depends on whether or not you're Black. And this is what I mean. I'm trying to be as honest as I can here. So there's like if you do a master's of divinity degree, or if you go to any theology, I'm going to talk about theology side. There will be white authors who you will cite in agreement and disagreement, even though there's fundamental like divergences. So you can have someone like people can say, God, I love Karl Barth, or I love this person, but this part of Karl Barth I don't agree with, but I find this part helpful, or this part. And so there is actually a reading and a sophisticated appropriation of the entirety of the Western intellectual tradition. People who are like not at all Catholic, don't have a Catholic bone in their body, will love Augustine, right? And ignores ecclesiology, for example. But it's only with Black people, or it's largely Black people, where we have to be in agreement on every single thing before we're heard. So it's very difficult to have a sophisticated appropriation of Black thought, where you can say, this part of what this person said, I found helpful. This part of what the person said, I found horrible. Instead, what they want is the Black person to come on and criticize the Black people who they don't like. And so it's one of the things that I'm trying to learn how to do is engage in a conversation with Black thinkers in the same way that I was taught to engage with other thinkers. And that may seem straightforward, but in these spaces, when it's not an unapologetic, everything this person has ever said is horrible, then people don't want to listen to it. And I think I'm trying to find a way to do it with the same way with Black women, because if people can say they came to the conversation about Black intellectual thought late, I would say I'm not as guilty of that as it relates to Black men. But it's I realized that at a certain point there's this gaping hole in my my intellectual development. I had kind of an intuitive. My mom raised me. I had strong black women around me, and like vulnerable black women around me who made it okay to be vulnerable. And I had that as a kind of a cultural value. We had black female preachers and all of those things growing up in my Baptist church. But as far as reading a lot of kind of published black female thought, that's even harder to find than like black male thought. And then I had to realize, okay, I'm starting to read it. How do I critically engage it and not just be paternalistic and say, no, this woman deserves my full attention and my full engagement, not just my passive reception, but how do I go beyond also being just hostile because it's different? And so for me, it's a lot of like, I don't know what you call it, getting accustomed to that kind of rhythm and adding that into my plate of scholarship. And so it's just good to hear you kind of thinking through the same thing. And you also saying like, oh, because I think that whenever you write, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, I'm thinking about what you said about editing that your book. Whenever you're a black writer, you're always thinking about how you're presenting us to the world. And so there's the desire to kind of edit voices so that you can present our best foot forward instead of letting black people be messy.
Yes.
And so I guess I'm talking to myself about saying how do we get to the place where we allow our own intellectual tradition to be messy sometimes. So you got this book. Can you at least give us like a little bit of a preview of the other two, at least conceptually what you got going on? People need to know what's coming next for Jasmine.
Yeah, one is that I'm writing a young adult version of the book about Black women so that people can use it in schools. And it was so funny when I pitched the idea to my publisher because they were like, oh, one of the publishers that I was talking to was like, oh, are you comfortable talking to that like 6th, 7th, 8th grade like bracket? And again, just that idea of like we're one thing. So like she's a writer, she's a mother, I'm like, I teach.
Oh, don't even get me started by people saying you're an academic. I was like, let me tell you something.
I know. I was like, yes, I am. So it's going to be a young adult version of that book. And then I'm also writing a book about womanhood and shame and the ways that shame impacts our ideas of womanhood and what the gospel says to shame.
You're a writer. You have these books and you're trying to live as a fully formed Christian mother, wife, woman, person. Like, what are you hoping for? And this is to once again put some context for, I don't know when this is going to air. We're coming into kind of this, we're coming at the end of the election season, hopefully, and into kind of our new reality. Like, are you hopeful for the future? Has this last year of being in the public and finding your voice, has it made you more cynical, less cynical? Like, as you look to the future, what do you see for you and for the culture more broadly?
I'm hopeful for the future. I think I've spent my entire life in some measure of spotlight because of whose daughter I am. And this last year has been one of the first times in my life where I can clearly see that I'm becoming my own person and I like who she is. And that's really neat. And so I'm feeling hopeful to just continue to grow and to continue to learn and to continue to learn how to express God's truth through writing. I love writing. I love it so much.
Can you say more about like what does it feel like for the people who are trying to find themselves? Everybody doesn't have a famous dad. Yeah. But everybody's trying to come into their own identity and their own vocation. Like, was there a moment where it became clear or something that changed in you where you said, this is who God made me to be and I'm comfortable in it, and the people who don't like it can kind of go kick rocks? Was there something that happened, or was it just over time?
Is when I got my book deal this last year. I had 4 publishers interested in the book, and it had nothing to do with anything about whose daughter I was or anything about and it was like, all of my life, I have wanted to be a writer. I have wanted to be a teacher. 6-year-old Jasmine would have said the same thing. 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, all of my life. And this is the first year of my life where I am collecting a paycheck as a writer that can sustain me. Like, it is my full-time vocation. And it had nothing to do with anybody but me. Yeah. And that was this huge moment for me to realize that all of the internal work that I had been doing over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years was really coming to fruition, being able to see. And I mean, not everybody's a writer, but like, I just think finding that vocation and finding that peace and that joy in that vocation and just seeing all the things that God's poured into me for this moment has been just an incredible experience.
I remember, for me, in case people want, this is confession time. I remember when I first started writing for the New York Times, and people don't know the full backstory of that. When they first reached out to me, they said, "Hey, Esau, could you write something on reparations?" And I said, actually, no, because I know nothing about the topic. I mean, I know about reparations, but I don't know it other than just like, give Black people stuff because y'all treated us bad. It was nothing sophisticated. And so the first article that I wrote for them was about Christmas. And then the second article that I wrote for them was about the coronavirus. And at first, even then, it was like, it's just random. And then when Ahmaud Arbery happened, and I don't think that I have been that summer. I was mad for like 2 months. Yeah. I mean, like out of my mind. And I wrote the article, what the Bible says about Black anger. The one before that was Ahmaud Arbery in the America That Doesn't Exist.
I loved both of those, by the way.
I snapped. I was like in an out of body. I was like, I'm done with this. And this is what I could tell you. Like I found myself as a writer on the second one of those. What the Bible says about Black anger. And I will tell you this. I wrote that article with the goal of getting fired by the New York Times. When I sat down and wrote it, because I knew they don't listen. New York Times doesn't listen to this. So what do I care? So let me tell you how I was feeling. I had written the Ahmaud Arbery article. And then right after this, not right after this, but like George Floyd becomes public and all this other stuff. And so I'm writing this, and I say to myself, this might get through the editorial process, but I know once this hits, nobody, because I'm going full Jesus.
Right.
I'm going like, it's going to be all Black at the beginning and all Jesus at the end. And there is a line when I wrote about people smiling as they took pictures of Black bodies. Like, there's always been evidence of Black suffering that didn't move America to change. And then I said, the only solution I'm going to put into this is Jesus. And I don't care if I ever write anything again. I'm just going to say it the way I feel it. And so after I wrote that article, and then a week or two later, they called and said, do you want to do a monthly column? I was like, oh, okay, then now I know how we're going to do this. But it was this moment where I felt like I know exactly what God wants me to say.
Yes.
And I know that some folks aren't going to like it. And I don't care.
Yeah, it's like you have to say it.
That article was an intentional act. I literally said to when I sent the email off, goodbye, New York Times. I'm out.
Nice.
It was like a drop. It was a drop the mic, not in the sense of quality, in the sense of saying it exactly how it's called What the Bible Says About. Like that's like that idea. I was just like, man. And what the important part about that though is I think that every person, and like you said, whether or not you're a writer, you have to get to the point where you are clear, Black Christian, about what God has called you to do. And you have to be able to pursue that fearlessly. And one of the things that the reason that I wanted to have you back for this season is that I saw you doing the same thing, and I saw you paying the price for it.
Yeah.
And even though I only met you, I've never actually been in the same room with you, I don't think. But I saw, it's like, man, they coming for Jasmine on the internet just for her shining. And so I'm glad that like on the other end of it, you found your vocation. I hope that people like appreciate it. The last thing I want to ask you is this: how has that? And I know I've asked you to you a bunch of times. Has this made you like more defensive? Are you less trusting? Like, how have you managed to protect yourself and keep yourself healthy during all of this? And what advice would you give to other people who are finding their voice and who are paying for it? How would you give them advice on how to keep themselves as they continue to move into the world and experience opposition and misunderstanding?
I've honestly learned that nobody is owed the sound of my voice. So as far as this, like, this election happened, I have not said a thing about Trump. I have not said a thing about Biden. I have not said a thing about Harris. I have not said a thing about Pence. And I think it comes down to, I speak when I feel a conviction to share that is going to withstand any criticism that comes. If I don't have a conviction that's able to withstand that criticism, I keep my mouth closed. And it's been a process to learn that for me, but I have learned it. And I realize that people are not owed my opinion on whatever. Yeah, I feel like Twitter has become this place where it's like, it's how the common man can experience paparazzi, like going outside and everybody being, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Well, Miss Holmes, what do you think about? And I think that people just feel like they have to comment on every single thing. Like you said with reparations, it's like, that's not my area. So I'm not going to speak. And this whole election situation, not my area. So I'm just like, I'm just going to let other people talk, and I'm going to be a fly on the wall.
So interestingly enough, I'm glad that you said that. This might be freedom for people. You've not seen a lot from me in this same election cycle coming into October into November. I have some articles that are coming up that I think will be published in the Times and the Post afterwards. But they were saying, well, we're right now, we're going to put our election articles first.
Yeah.
And I didn't have anything to say that like other people who were more qualified couldn't say. So for the most part, I fell back. As a matter of fact, and I don't think the people really believe this, and why would they care? But if you could go back and look over like the last 4 years, I almost never actually write directly about the president.
Yeah, same.
I mean, every now and then he comes across, but there are zero articles that like address him directly.
Yep.
Because it's not at the center of I'm a New Testament scholar.
Right.
And in so much as sometimes politics impinge upon the life of the church and the church's witness, I will push back on it. But I feel like there was something to be mad about every single day on the internet.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to be mad all the time. And there's literally, it's like, I mean, there's some people who used to tweet. They say, okay, internet, what we mad about today? And I noticed that. And I was like, every day there's something. And like, I didn't have the policy competence to be enraged about the myriad of issues that were coming.
Same.
It's like, I do not have, forgive me, I don't have a developed understanding of immigration policy. But I know you shouldn't be locking up kids and tossing their parents away.
Yep.
So, but that's the level of sophistication I got for you.
Yep.
I mean, I don't have a developed form of a developed idea about police reform. I can say that it's necessary, and I can say this is the reasons why.
Yep.
But I'm happy to cede the ground to people who have those expertise. And that's part of what this podcast is about. Is to say, bring me your passion.
Yeah,
and
teach me.
Here's the opportunity to teach me. And so hopefully people have learned something from Jasmine. Speaking of Black women, isn't there a podcast that you and another Black woman do? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, my friend Portia and I have started a podcast called Sweet Tea, and it is just a place for us to talk about everything under the sun. We've had episodes about marriage, and we've had episodes about politics, and episodes about theology, and just a place for us to talk, and a place for us to listen to others, and just stay in our lanes, stay in our wheelhouses, and have a really good time. One of the running jokes that we have on the podcast right now is that I know all of the capitals of all 50 states in the United States. So every episode, when there's like a lull in conversation, I just like give a couple states and capitals. So a fun thing for listeners to do is because sometimes I don't get them right. So poking in to be like, actually, Jasmine, Augusta is the capital of Maine, not Georgia. It's fun.
Oh, there we go. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. If there is a season 3, you might be our like recurring guest that we bring back every year. Hopefully we treated you well. Go pick up Mother to Son, and when all of her other books drop, pick those up too. I don't have 3 books coming out in the next couple of years. I'm doing what I can. Thank you for listening. If you're a human being, words hurt. We, as Black people of faith, are doing our best to articulate the gospel and the demands of the Christian tradition as we understand it in the public square. And even when you're right, and you feel comfortable in your convictions. The criticism of other Christians still hurts. Me and Jasmine both have kind of bear some of the marks of that. And so it was both good to have someone to commiserate with, but also difficult to hear. No one escapes this without wounds. Hopefully it encourages people to learn that those wounds need not be destructive. Thank you for listening to The Disruptors. We will be grateful if you would subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me at Esau McCaulley, and you can check out the best and most disruptive offerings from InterVarsity Press authors at ivpress.com.